Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very first Flexa and Otter webinar. This kind of platform doesn't count me down when we go live, so if someone in the chat could just let me know that you can hear me all right, that would be great. Yes, you can. Perfect. Oh, wow, everyone, thank you very much. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for spending an hour of your Tuesday afternoon with us. We, Sam and I, have known each other for a little while, actually, obviously doing quite similar things in the UK hiring space, but in very different areas. And we have been to the pub together a few times and had long chats about exactly this topic. So we thought that putting on a webinar where we effectively just have a bit of a chat, but hopefully it will be helpful to everybody, and also use half of the session as well for you to be able to ask your questions. So everything employer brand, hiring, employee advocacy, candidate experience, recruitment and retention related, please do pop it into the little questions panel there. And what we'll do is spend the first half an hour kind of running through the main topics and themes that we think should hopefully be useful to everybody. And then the second half, we will be just tackling your questions, put out some really difficult ones for us, anything you're struggling with at the moment, or any of the kind of future of work trends, and we will do our absolute best to try to answer them. So without further ado, I will let Sam, CEO and co-founder of Otter, introduce himself.
Hey everyone, I am Sam, the CEO, as Molly said. We started Otter about 4 years ago to make job search less soul crushing. And really what we had an insight on was that everyone is focused on companies, but not enough people were focused on job seekers. So that was the space we tried to carve out. And now we describe ourselves as the better way to find a job in tech. Over 1 million people have used us. A job is saved every 3 seconds. We're live in UK, Europe and US, so doing well. And my role as CEO, I do a little bit of everything internally, and externally I do things like this, speaking to people and other leaders in the space about recruitment, hiring, future of work, and I manage the fundraising and the investment process, so lots of fun there. I'm looking forward to chatting today.
Awesome. And by way of introduction, if you haven't been to one of our Flexa webinars before and haven't met me before, I'm Molly Johnson-Jones. I am also CEO and co-founder of Flexa, and I do a very similar thing that Sam does, but for Flexa. So everything kind of brand and awareness related. Lots of the kind of future of work strategy, fundraising, and obviously running the business really day to day with Flexa. So I mean, if you've been to one of our webinars before, you'll know our story, but it very much came out of a personal issue that I had, where I just saw a total lack of transparency in the job hunting process. And for me, that was pretty crucial because I have an autoimmune disease. That means that sometimes I can't walk. And obviously not being able to walk means you can't get to an office every day. But back when I started work in kind of 2015, flexibility wasn't really very normal. And companies being honest and open about their working environments definitely wasn't normal. So I chose to go into investment banking, which was potentially silly because it's not the most notoriously flexible industry. And after 18 months, they said that they were open to flexible working requests. So I put a request for flexible working in to be able to work from home 1 day a week. 10 days later, they put a settlement package in front of me, sacked me, and told me to leave immediately. So I left that process confused because obviously they said they were open to flexible working requests. Now, they didn't lie, they were open to the request, but they weren't open to the flexible working. And I went into a job hunting process that, as Sam said, was pretty broken. I needed to understand whether a company was going to enable me to work from home 1 day a week, and I couldn't find anywhere at all. So kind of going through 2 years of various different kind of companies that said they were flexible, but really, they'd make you feel guilty, or they would insist that you send pictures of yourself from hospital or your swollen feet, which isn't really flexible. And then landed kind of early 2020 with the idea for Flexa, which is when we launched. We've now grown to coming up to 1 million users, all browsing for companies that offer some form of flexibility. And as we will kind of talk about as we go through our various different topics and themes, flexible working isn't just flexible working. Like, what does that actually mean? Flexible working for me means remote first, dog friendly, flexible hours. And for Sam, by the looks of it, sitting in an office, that means hybrid, bit of flexibility on hours and the ability to travel. It is so different from one person to another. So Flexa is here to attempt to make that process and make understanding a working environment and a culture easy. rather than the average person spending 2 to 3 hours researching every single company. So that was a rather long-winded introduction to Flexa. But why didn't we kind of crack on with the first topic? And I think one that's at the forefront of so many people that work in TA, recruitment, HR people, is like, how has the hiring process changed as a pandemic? Like the last 3 years have seen a paradigm shift in the way that we work, and that has inevitably changed the hiring process. So what's your view on that, Sam?
I think my first point is the obvious one, which is a lot of it went online. And the consequence of that is you didn't really get a feel for the company that you're working for. I think there was a lot to be said about going to the office, meeting the people, seeing what it's like just to chat. And that's now missing. But it also came at a point where I think, as you rightly said, Molly, people care a lot about the environment they're working in, the culture, the flexibility. And so now I think the real direction of travel is how can you talk as much as you can upfront about what a company's like without inviting someone to the office. And so that's why we're seeing products like ours develop tools that allow employers to bring that transparency to bear, whether it's about flexible working, whether it's about working environments, whether it's about salaries, culture. Because the best people really do want that information in front of them. I think what I've found fascinating with building this business is it's a competitive market, particularly in the UK right now. Yes, people are talking about recession, but actually employment figures are as high as they've ever been. And so the talented people have a lot of choices, and therefore companies have to really showcase what their best foot forwards are. And I think that's been really fascinating to watch because the household brands, the likes of Monzo, Revolut, Spotify, they attract people naturally, but there's hundreds and thousands of amazing companies who really need to figure out how do they put their best foot forward in an online world and also in a world where people are caring about different things. And we've seen lots of different changes, whether it's interview processes, hiring processes. At Otter, we often take people for a walk before they accept an offer to get to know us, because there's no other way of really getting to know someone in person. So lots of things are changing in lots of products like ours.
Definitely. I think what's been really interesting is kind of watching as the pandemic threw us all into fully remote working. Like obviously that wasn't everybody's ideal, but what it did do was accelerate the kind of conversation around what work should be and whether work is just going to be a place that you go to 9 till 6 every day, or whether actually it can be quite different. And there were companies pre-pandemic kind of innovating before that, like they weren't forced into it because of it, but it became mainstream and probably increased its progress by such a significant amount. And what that's meant is now that people have their own preferences. So if you're looking for a product manager role, a remote first product manager role is a different role to fully remote product manager, to a hybrid 2 days in the office manager, a flexible hours or dog friendly office product manager. All of those roles are different. And I think what we've definitely seen is that actually the traditional hiring process just isn't set up for that. So if you look at, I guess, what it's been like for kind of the last 30 years, it's like job adverts have just been these little black and white boxes, which are like, I need a product manager and you should have these things and you'll be lucky to work for us. That obviously used to be on paper. And then obviously the internet becoming much more mainstream, all it did was move onto the internet, but in a very, very similar format, like on Indeed or Reed or LinkedIn. And actually, no one really wants to look for a job like that. And it really doesn't give people the information that they are seeking. And I think that that's particularly accelerated throughout the pandemic. And it's been pushed further by Gen Z and millennials becoming the bulk of the workforce, because they have really, really pushed and shifted that power dynamic. I think like they want to understand, like, what is the purpose of your company? What is the culture of your company? And there's a lot more expectation, and people want answers as well before they even bother applying somewhere. Now, I think that kind of shift in terms of power balance and desire for information has been probably one of the biggest shifts that we've seen over the last 3 years. But so many companies haven't adapted to that yet. And speaking of which, hopefully over the next kind of 20, 30 minutes, we'll be able to give some tips and insights on how you can adapt and ultimately stand out. Because if you do have a great culture, a great purpose, a great working environment, if you're not shouting about it, you're losing out.
I remember when we met, Molly, we both smiled at maybe using a very similar line to explain why our products were needed, which was If you go on Airbnb back in 2020, you could search for a flat in Amsterdam with a hot tub and a smoke alarm and a balcony. Yeah, if you wanted to find a job in technology companies using Python with flexible working and with this number of employees, good luck. And it was crazy that that product wasn't existing in the job search space. As you said, it was the newspaper that was just brought online. So I completely agree. I love the story detail.
Yeah, it's just amazing how nothing has really changed in the hiring process of those jobs for about 30 years. Just an online newspaper. That's all it's become. So I guess kind of like to address probably why most people signed up to this webinar is the idea of hiring ultimately being like marketing, and how treating hiring a bit like marketing can drastically reduce costs. And what I always talk about when I think about hiring being like a marketing funnel is the fact that if you said to a marketer, hey, can you convert me some cold leads? They'd look at you like you lost your mind. And that is ultimately what an applicant randomly stumbling on your black and white job description that doesn't explain very much is attempting to do, convert a cold lead. Whereas if you think about hiring as selling your working environment as a place that somebody should want to work, you start to end up with a much more funneled approach where at the very top, you've got your social media, your Glassdoor employer brand platforms like Flexa, that is ultimately trying to get your company discovered by hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. They might not be wanting the job right now. It might not be the right role right now, but they are aware of you as a brilliant place to work, just like top of funnel marketing. Then what you want that to do is push people down into a brilliant experience. Very interesting candidate, like, oh, thank you, somebody's saying interesting point. That distracted me. Push someone down into the middle of funnel, which is much more engaged. That's more about, I am either passively looking, but I want to patients in, or I'm actively looking and like now is the time that I want to really initiate my job hunt. And that's with platforms just like Otter, who are continuing that transparency and that brilliant experience down into the funnel, which means you don't lose people. You're continuing that same transparency and that same candidate experience and pulling them down into your applicant tracking system or your own interview processes, which I see as the very bottom of the funnel. Again, you've got control over that. Use your own ATS. And then you have a fully functioning funnel where you've got hundreds of thousands converting into that middle of the funnel, which is thousands of people, hopefully, into that very bottom of the funnel, hundreds of people that you're interviewing. And ultimately treating it like that, as repeatedly, time and time again, save companies so much money, because you're not then having to go out and use recruiters that are charging 20% of a salary just because you're like, oh God, I need to hire a head of sales right now, and I've got literally nobody there who knows who I am or wants to do that job. So Sam, I'd be really interested to kind of hear your views on that from Otter's perspective, as being, because you do a bit of the top of funnel and the middle of funnel and kind of bottom, so you see all bits really.
Yeah, I think it's a hard question to answer, because I don't think employer branding or branding in employment has evolved as well as the marketing world has evolved. I'm the sort of de facto CMO of Otter, so I sort of see both sides of how mature it's become in marketing and how or the opposite of mature it is in the recruitment space. I think what we see is that a product like Otter, as you said, is also converting people. We're not just brand marketing. We're not just putting a shop window for companies. We're also trying to convert job seekers and their passive or active moments into making an application. But really, I think those top and middle parts are blurring a lot more than they used to be, because I think that's why LinkedIn and Indeed was very, very good products back when it was a black and white, sort of a black and white, as you called it, advert, because people really didn't need that top of funnel brand building, because they didn't care necessarily about as many things as they care about now. And actually it was, hey, I want a great salary and this job title. But because things are blurring, I think there needs to be multiple products or different approaches from recruitment and talent functions to think about this. And my favorite analogy that I use for marketing, but I think it actually spreads really, really nicely to employer branding, is imagine you have a fruit tree. So let's call the fruit tree a lemon tree. And lemons are your applicants or people you want to hire into your company. And there's a period where, when you start your business and you're growing fast, that you can probably just pick fruits from the lemon tree through having a job ad live or using referrals from your current employees. And over time, it gets harder and harder to pick fruit from that lemon tree because they're running out. And what you need brand marketing and top of funnel activity to grow more lemons, to grow more pieces of fruit. And if you neglect it, and if you neglect it too long, it will be incredibly hard to grow your business at the rate you need with people that fit your culture, because you've not invested in that top of funnel activity to grow your lemons. And so there will be a point where businesses will have to think about both. And they'll have to think about investing in tools like ours and money and activities and consulting projects to really figure out how do you build that lemon tree such that when you do now need to grow really fast and pick them off the tree again, there's a lot of ripe lemons, people who are following your brand, know that you stand for something, know that this is the type of culture that you have. And that was a very different problem to 10 years ago. And for us, we're just trying to figure out how do you best give employers the right tools to express their brand and amplify their brand. And then also on the job seeker side, how do you help people really figure out what they care about? And I'll say one more thing, then I'll pause. One of the things I found fascinating is people often don't know what they want in this space. And so it's not quite like brand marketing, where if you're building the brand for Apple, you can say, let's be really aspirational and target people who want to have technology that thinks differently and be very innovative. As an employer, it's not that easy to spot what people are going to match with, so to speak, with your brand. For one person, it might be the flexible angle. For another person, it might be actually your views on salary transparency. For another person, it might be the fact that you're growing really fast and you have great progression. And so it's a really complicated thing because people care about different things and it's not one voice fits all. And that's something that we haven't figured out yet in terms of product, but when we talk to employers, that's something they really want to know. They have a view on their employee value proposition, but how do they communicate different things to different people without seeming like they're trying to be a one size fits all?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. I think because although you can obviously compare the hiring process to marketing, like you're not really buying a product, you're buying something that's much more personal to you than that. You're buying into a culture and a company that appeals to you. And I think that, we keep coming back to this theme of sort of transparency, but ultimately what every company can do well is not try to appeal to everybody, because that's a terrible idea. You can't. But in the different areas that we know, based on like lots of research people care about, so that could be progression and salary, that could be culture, that can be, and they talk about culture, I mean like autonomy, senior leadership, role modeling, what is the level of responsibility and accountability, progression, reward, working environments as well, and be as specific as possible as to what's your culture and what that working environment is like, and put that everywhere. Like that is ultimately the base of employer brand is what is your company, but it's also about putting it in the right places that the people that you think would want to work for you will be. And I think that second piece is very often like heavily ignored. So people just think, oh, I can do employer brand. I'm just explaining about what my company is. But if you're not putting it on social media, where 79% of every single job seekers in the pool there will be looking, 79% is huge. They want social media. They want to be able to research you to understand what your progression is like, what your employees experience. They want to see employee advocacy as well. So it's just about making sure that you're putting out as much authentic, I don't like that word, but like true content as possible in the places that you will actually be seen. I actually wrote about how to start with employer brand in like 5 easy and free steps last week in my news on LinkedIn. So I'll link to that in the comments, as hopefully that will be kind of helpful to people. I'll go dig that out shortly. But I think employer brand is seen as something that's quite difficult, whereas actually all it is in the beginning, it can get very difficult once you get bigger. In the beginning, it's about shouting about the things that you as a company care about and putting them in the places that people like. So why don't we talk through, because obviously we've come onto this idea of the funnel. And one of the most important things in hiring and in that funnel is job descriptions, because that's where you can lose somebody right away. If they read a bad one, they'll be like, I am absolutely not applying to that company. So you have seen hundreds of thousands of job descriptions, Sam, I'm sure. What is a good job description and what's a bad one? Start wherever you want.
I prepped some notes for this because I think this is one of the nice questions you prompted me on. Let me start off with what we don't like to see, and it's really, really common. So I hope I'm not patronising those who don't do this, but it's very common. Don't include a laundry list of things that you want. And when I say laundry list, 10 plus bullets, it feels like a laundry list because it really does put off people, and it typically puts off people from underrepresented groups, because the longer the list, the more people think that's not me. And that's actually not what you want at this stage. You want to try and get people in to your funnel, and then you can assess through an assessment process if they're a right fit. The more people you lose at that point, the worse. So that's the what not to do. We did some interesting research at Otter, which was jobs with 5 bullet points for requirements actually perform the best. So they've got enough information for you to say, right, I can opt in. This feels like it's for me, but not so much information that it suddenly becomes daunting. So then what should you do? I've tried to pick out maybe 3-4 points. And the first one is excitement. And again, I know this sounds really obvious, but lots of companies seem to forget from our perspective that this is a piece of sales collateral. This isn't just a description of a job. This is a moment to completely entice someone to say this company is more excited than the rest of the options out there.
Yeah.
If you're a software engineer right now, you've got hundreds of options. If it's boring, if it's functional, if it's bland, you're not going to stand out. And so the question is, how do you show that excitement? How do you get people excited? We really love to see people push on the mission, because when you break down a lot of roles, they often do look the same. And so mission is one of the areas that we think you should spend a lot of time talking about. But other than that, there's 2 more areas. One is, where does the candidate spend their time, and the types of work they'll get involved in, not just the requirements. It's very easy to write a job description as if it's something that you need. I need someone who's got 5 years of experience. I need someone who's doing this. And people completely forget about what is the purpose of this role. Why am I going to get excited? What types of projects will they work on? I see a comment in the chat. I think this is spot on. What's the mission of the role, not just the company? Because that's really what they're comparing. They're thinking, what am I going to get out of this? And finally, anything that makes your company stand out in terms of its culture and what it stands for and how people work. Because this is actually sometimes where the early stage companies or smaller companies can make the biggest difference, because you'll have views on things that other companies are just way behind on, whether it's flexible working, approach to benefits, your values, anything that's interesting about how you talk to your employees, how you engage employees. Again, it's a piece of sales collateral, and these are the things that hopefully help you stand out. But as Molly said, the journey doesn't start on a job description. It starts when you first are able to showcase what you stand for into the world, whether it's seeing a LinkedIn post or whether it's going on a website like Flexa. And so thinking about it as a piece of sales collateral is my biggest advice.
Absolutely. And making sure that whatever tone of voice and whatever employer branding you've done, that your job descriptions are consistent with that. I always talk about trying to get personality into job descriptions, and it's hard because ultimately it's just a piece of paper that's you need to be these things and we offer this, but trying to get a bit of your company personality into that so that it's a consistent experience from when they first experience your employer brand all the way through to when they get accepted or rejected as a potential employee is super, super important. I think those the point you said about the job descriptions with the 5 bullet points being the best performing, I think that's really interesting. Because what we've seen through a lot of research as well is that when companies break it down into must have and nice to have, is also really good when it comes to people not necessarily and going, oh, that really doesn't sound like me, as if you've got three must haves or 5 must haves and then a few nice to haves at the bottom. That would be this really would make you stand out. You'd be an ideal applicant is super important. Whereas so many job descriptions, as you said, treat it as just a list of requirements when actually half of them probably aren't really important. People have just written them down as nice to haves. And I think one of the easy ways for companies to make sure that their job descriptions remain a really high quality, because actually if you've got different hiring managers all writing them, different people's tone of voice, different style, that's really hard to quality control. But if somebody in your TA or people team who's brilliant at writing them, just do a template. And it's basically all that needs to be done is change out the first paragraph of what the role is and the requirements and the mission of the role. That's it. And then you have that really authentic, consistent tone of voice that will happen across all of your employer brand and hiring collateral. So that's a really quick win, is just to put in a template. Don't let everybody have a free run on job descriptions, because not that many people are good at writing them.
Something that's quite neat that we can do at Otter, and what we do is we have a customer success team that works with our clients, and we try and help them understand how's your job performing versus others.
Yeah.
And once you get the company view on, okay, our jobs aren't performing as well, let's make changes across the board, that's when you can really start to see the difference. And you see a company go from, hey, like a lot of people don't save or apply to your job, to now they're making a big difference. But it's that consistency in internal processes that actually is important. And so, yeah, I'd love the advice. Get someone who's really talented, who understands the space, who cares a lot, to enforce consistency and test as a consistent thing. The worst thing I think I see is when individual roles look very different, because employers what they're doing, that they're trying to innovate and change the tone and attract more people, but it just sometimes comes across as slightly either sloppy, like which one's the most up-to-date one? Is it this number and this rating, or is when you won this award in 2010 or 2020? And I think seeing consistency also from a candidate's perspective, they like that, because people do look at other roles that your company's hiring for.
Yeah, they definitely will. Just a reminder for people, if you want to ask questions, please do drop them into the question bit rather than the chat. I can comb through the chat too, but easier to put them in questions, anything at all based on what we've talked about or haven't talked about. And we will come to them once a few more have come in. So I guess we've been talking about the funnel. Now, should we talk about the kind of candidate experience side of things? Because I've seen quite a few people in the chat explain about lack of salary transparency, ghosting, bad email communication, weeks between talking to people, totally understandable bugbears. They're pretty awful candidate experience. But what would your advice be to companies on maintaining a brilliant candidate experience at all stages?
I think the first piece of advice is try and decide your bar. And what I mean by bar is, are you going to be the company that never makes a candidate unhappy? And you have 100 out of 100 record of an excellent experience through all brand touch points, from your way you talk on social all the way up to that email to reject someone, or phone call to accept someone into the offer. Because I think once you've figured that out as a company, you can then ask yourself, what are the processes we'll do to meet that bar? I think the thing I see a lot of companies struggle with is wanting to do more in terms of candidate experience than they can really offer. There's no surprise that companies don't get back to all candidates in a timely manner, because it's a hard process and it takes a lot of time to give reasons and feedback. And so I think that's step one, is deciding internally, because once you've done that as someone in a recruitment role, you can then say, right, this is my goal. What are the processes I need to go deliver against? You've mentioned all the things, right, Molly, like salary transparency, very clear views on the application process, responding in a timely manner, giving people dignity when they get rejected, giving people feedback if you can give it, because it's been far enough through the process. Like, these are all things that people know. And so that's why often I focus my advice on more of the process side, because it's a choice. Like, Otter has hired 70 people into my company. Like, we have given feedback to everyone past a telephone interview stage. And I don't think we've missed that. And it's because very early on, I said, this is the bar, like, this is what I want to achieve in my business. For us, we have to have a great candidate experience, because that's what we're preaching. And that's what we're trying to sell as what we want other companies to do. And it's part of our brand. We want to make sure people leave with a great experience. But it was that early stage of, how do I build my hiring function? How do I build the way talent acquisition works with hiring managers? Who owns the rejection? Is it the hiring managers or the talent acquisition team? Like, these are all things that you have to think about to enable you to deliver the candidate experience you want. And probably my last point, and then I'll pause, is it really does matter, because we have had so many, and from a beneficial perspective, it really does matter. Like, we've had so many people we've rejected go and tell friends, you've got to apply to Otter, because that was an amazing experience, and they treated me fairly, and they gave me the information that I needed at the right time. Like, it really does pay off. But I know it's a hard decision, because it comes down to how many people are in the team, how much time do we have, how many people do we need to hire? Like, these are hard questions, but hopefully some of those pieces kind of resonate with you, Molly. I know that's something we've talked about a lot.
Yeah, it definitely does. And we've taken a really similar approach. We give feedback to people if we've interviewed them. And I've had quite a few conversations with companies where they're like, we'd love to be able to give feedback to everybody on their applications. If that's your bar and you want to make that work, then you can. But it's much better for somebody to get rejected quickly if they're going to be rejected before interview than it is for you to spend 3 weeks, not bring them to interview and then give them feedback on that. So again, it comes back to that process and what you want that bar to be. But I think it's super, super important that people are treated in a timely manner, because job hunting can sometimes be long, stressful. You get your hopes up all the time. It's much better to be honest with people, and make sure you treat them like a human in a difficult position, because they may well be. And then I guess finally, just like to talk about the last bit of the funnel, which is that very top of funnel, and what people are ultimately looking for in employer brands. So assuming salary is fair, and obviously you can help people to assume salary is fair by being transparent about that salary. Obviously, I know there are obviously limitations to salary transparency, but if you can put in a salary range, you really should. Flexibility is the second most important thing to people. Again, talk about flexibility, that means working environment. Very different things to different people. And I think what I've seen working with hundreds of companies when it comes to shouting about working environments is that a lot of companies get really worried that their flexibility isn't enough, that it's not super appealing. Maybe we won't shout about that because we're not fully remote and people can't work from all over the world. And I think, interestingly, that kind of fear around what flexibility is holding companies back a lot. Because although the media might tell you that Gen Z and millennials never want to set foot back in an office ever, it's not true. So if we look at all of the different things that people are searching for on Flexa, and we have coming up to, about 200,000 searches happening every month for those different types of flexibility. And actually remote first, so the choice of an office is number one. And fully remote is number two, as you might expect. But we've still got over 25% of people searching for regular hybrid. So like 2 or 3 days a week in the office. That is millions of people. So don't be afraid about shouting about being hybrid or having flexible hours or dog friendliness or all of those different things that make up flexibility, because there will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out there looking for that. And even if you're not appealing to the 80%, appealing to 20% of office workers that want that role, that's exciting. That's still enormous numbers. And it means that you're providing people with the information to actually make an educated decision about if you're the right place to work for them. And you'll see in the little chat thing, what we've pinned at the top there is our workplace benchmarking quiz, which is designed to tell you if what you've created is enough, is your approach to working location or hours or benefits or culture, how many people is that going to appeal to? What proportion of the job hunting population will that appeal to? So that takes 2 minutes and it's completely free, and we can give you're appealing to this many 100,000 people every month, or this proportion of the working population, based on millions of data points that we've collected. So please do take that, because we've been amazed at how many people have been like, oh, that's actually quite a relief. More people than I thought wanted to work in a hybrid way, or wanted the flexible hours or enhanced leave that we've got. And just be transparent about it, because it also makes an enormous impact to DEI as well. And that's kind of a final topic that I haven't touched on yet, is if you're withholding all of this information and keeping it secret until interview process, you're not enabling people who might have different needs, whether that be to work from home or flexible hours, not want to go into the office for that reason. You aren't enabling them to make an empowered decision about whether you're the right company for them. And so you will see a very natural improvement in your diversity metrics by being transparent about what you offer. And Sam, I know you've seen that in terms of salary transparency and how people, particularly women, will react to that.
Yeah, it's crazy the increase in volume of applications a job gets if it's got a transparent salary. And I think something that really shocks companies when we tell them this, it doesn't even need to be a high salary. It's not significant that the salary's high. It's just significant that the salaries are there. So we're huge proponents of salary transparency. We think it helps a lot of the things you talked about, but also just because it's one of the most frustrating things in the job search is finding a role, being quite excited by it and wondering, is this right for me? Is it overpaid? Is it underpaid? And whether I can negotiate and so on. So we've done a lot of marketing to try and put the problem out there and start really talking about the problem. And then we've got a few mechanisms that really try and promote salaried jobs, and that sticks, because I think it's something like you get an extra 50% of applications, which when it's a competitive market, that makes a big difference. What we have to work on is how do you encourage leaders and HR leaders of very big organizations to change their approach, because when you're complex, you've got many different levels, many different bands, and it does become a hard political internal politics question.
Yeah. We've just had a really relevant question as a segue onto that one, actually. So Marty has asked, in terms of salary, as a startup, sometimes you don't have access to super up-to-date salary benchmarking. So they're worried that if they do put a salary on, then someone amazing wouldn't apply, while they will likely be able to negotiate an increase with that manager that oversees that budget. What would your thoughts be on that, Sam?
Ooh, it's tricky. I mean, my approach internally would be let's set the salary band that we think is right with the best information we can get. Whether it's from using benchmarks from Otter or other places, and phoning up friends and colleagues running businesses. And if you're not getting the traction you want, then alter it and change it. But I think you can also allude to the fact that, especially if you're reaching out to someone and say, hey, on LinkedIn message, hey, I think you're right for this role. What do you think of the salary? It's a very open question to ask. But in your job description, I think you can sometimes allude to the fact that you are open to negotiation for exceptional candidates, where candidates have more experience than we're expecting. And I think this hopefully opens up the door to those candidates who might be amazing, to use your words, who might not apply otherwise. But it's a tricky one. It's a really hard one.
I'd always encourage the range approach in that one, like have a conversation with the person that oversees the budget for that role, and say, like, if we found the perfect fit and they were absolutely incredible, like what's the maximum you would pay, and put that as the very, very top of that range. And then obviously where you think it should be will sit towards the middle / slightly lower end of that. And the ranges can really, really help, because not everybody expects to get the top of that range when they apply to the role. Like people generally have relatively realistic expectations of it. And if they don't have all of the nice to haves, and they obviously won't expect to get that top salary range. So I always think ranges really help, and they're a bit less scary than, like, you see some job descriptions and they're like £47,300, and you're like, how did you come to that? So go with ranges. And also with startups, I think a lot of people that want to work in startups are aware that there are a lot of other upsides. And so make sure that you're really selling those things too. Like, is it that you are working towards an amazing mission? Have you got an absolutely brilliant culture? Is there huge opportunity for progression and autonomy? Is there really good flexibility? Pick on those different things as well and sell those alongside salary, because a lot of people that want to and are used to working in startups are aware of the different trade-offs between those two things. Let's pick another question to make sure we've got loads now. Goodness. So here's a good one. Do we see large differences in hiring approaches across geographies? Obviously, I know that you looked at the US for a little while, so you probably got some pretty good knowledge on US versus UK kind of hiring approaches, and I can talk from a flexibility perspective.
I think one of the things that stood out to me when we first launched into the US was people make a lot more applications. And at first, when we saw this data, we thought, oh, it's because there's a lot more jobs. But actually, it's a cultural difference. In the US, you're taught to be a go-getter from young ages. You're taught to take risks. And therefore, people often take a chance and take a bet when they make an application in the US. Now, that's great because employers get more applications in their inbox, but that's bad because employers have to sift through applications from people who don't really care. And so one of the challenges that US employers are having is, how do we do a little bit more screening on people as to whether they've got the right motivations, the right fit for our culture, and so on. And that's a problem that's unsolved at this point, because the country is bigger, people are making more applications, it's therefore more noisy. I think US employers are really struggling to work out what to do there. Part of the solution will be really being crisp about what your employer value proposition is, really, really being crisp on what you care about in terms of people who are successful at your company, your mission, and so on. But then when you've got thousands of applications in your inbox, you need different approaches to screen and basically assess whether those candidates are right for you. On Otter, for example, we always encourage employees to add questions to their application process, because a little bit of friction might be scary, because you're thinking, oh, I'll lose people who are thinking I need to do an easy apply. But actually, that little bit of friction might then allow candidates to A, express why they're great, and B, get rid of the people who are firing off 100 applications in an evening. And in the US, that's just more of a thing. Whereas I think in the UK, France, Germany, market's not as big, volume isn't as high, and therefore that's not such a big pain problem.
Yeah, I was going to say something really similar, particularly around the kind of easy apply and just like firing off loads and loads of applications. It's better for companies to add that little, because ultimately you don't want people applying to you that don't care and they don't know what the name of your company is, and then you'll probably invite them to interview and they won't know who you are. So it is better that you put a little bit of friction there, and that's across all geographies. I think from a geographical perspective, what's interesting in terms of, I think, power balance, is that the UK seems to have developed quite quickly in terms of adapting to employee and candidate needs, and being much more upfront with that than what we've seen across a lot of Europe, which I do find really interesting, is that whether it's talking about 4-day weeks or enhanced parental leave or, you know, various different kinds of flexibility, UK companies seem much more open, which I do think has really, really helped from an employer brand perspective. So I'd encourage companies in other geographies to be pioneers of that, because you will get a lot more people interested in your company. We've got another interesting question that I have now lost. Here we go. So really interesting one in terms of, I don't like using the term ROI on employer brand, but for lack of a better term, ROI of employer brand. Tom Gallagher said, let's say you put everything discussed into place. How would you measure success? What data points? And thinking about more buy-in or investment from the business into employer brand. So this is something that we answer all the time. Employer brand is interesting because it can be broken down into lead indicators and lag indicators. And those lag indicators can take 12 months to materialize. So can be 6, you do it absolutely brilliantly, but it's not going to be that much quicker. So lead indicators, your markers of very likely success, are really, really similar to top of funnel marketing metrics. So how many hundreds of thousands of people are you being seen by on companies like Flexa? Like, we measure all of that for companies. We show you how many people are searching for your working environments, looking at your company profile pages, but also keep tabs on it in terms of social media. There are lots of different social media analytics tools that will show you how many people your social posts are being viewed by, and you can keep a running total of that. Naturally, that is then going to feed into how many companies are then engaging with your profile. Again, people can save companies on Otto, they can save companies on Flexa. How big a proactively built hiring pipeline have you got? That's another lead indicator of success of employer brand, because if you've got people like, this company is amazing, I love it, I want to work there, but you haven't got quite the right role for me, or maybe it's not quite the right time for me to move. If you've then got thousands of people sitting there waiting to work for you, when you do then push out that role, they're all going to apply straight away, and they're already sitting there and you've already effectively paid for them. So that's another brilliant way that it will reduce your speed to hire and cost to hire as well. So they're the lead indicators that we would generally focus on. The lag indicators that will then come through are those reduced cost to hire. You won't be spending 20% of an individual's first year salary on a recruiter, because you won't need to. And I always use Flexa as an example of employer brand success, is that we've hired everyone who works at Flexa, which is 16 people now, with literally zero spend. We've never had to hire a recruiter. Everybody's been in and interviewed, hired within 2 months. So we've seen the lead into lag indicator success. You can also measure it based on DEI, if that's a big focus of yours as well. You can see who is looking at you from a top of funnel perspective, and then who are you hiring. And retention, which is a really nice added bonus as well. The more that you shout about your culture, the more that you get your employees involved in doing that too, employee engagement and satisfaction increases as well, as long as you are listening to them and their feedback. So I cannot encourage people more strongly to focus on employer brand, because you've both got those lead metrics that you start seeing straight away, but the lag ones are something that cannot be achieved without focusing on the foundations of employer brand. Sam, I guess, would you add anything to that?
I'll try and answer this slightly differently, because your answer was so much more articulated than mine would have been. I think maybe on the bit about how do you get buy-in, I think probably I'll think about two angles if I was in your role, Tom. One is it's getting competitive, and this is what the best companies are doing. Therefore, if you're not as a company, you will fall behind. And I don't mean that in a scaremongering way, but if you do look at the likes of in London, Monzo, like they've got an incredible employer brand that they've been working on for years, and they're in many channels. That's hard to compete with if you're not doing those activities. The second, in terms of how to move leaders, storytelling is a very important thing. And try the analogy that I shared earlier, which is the lemon tree. If you're not investing in the brand side of employer marketing, your lemon tree will fall without any lemons, and you won't be able to grow more fruit, and you will struggle to hire people. And I think especially marketers will understand that, because that's something that's been in marketing for years. And so maybe lean on your marketing leaders, probably because the CMO or the CEO have already been discussing what's their split of brand marketing to performance marketing, to then try and encourage your chief people officer or your CEO to say, hey, as part of our recruitment budget, we need to be spending on employer branding such that overall our cost to hire, speed of hire, retention, DE&I metrics are great. Hopefully they'll start to get it if you can tell that strong story.
Yep, absolutely. And report on it as well. I think what's very interesting is often people in those perspectives, when you're trying to make a business, they just want to see some numbers. They want to be able to see what they're paying for. And so being honest about that and transparent about it too, and really being that advocate for employer brand and showing how it makes a difference, and keeping banging that drum as well. Another question about, where's it gone? Flexibility. So on the basis of my flexibility point, how do we create the psychological safety for people to disclose adjustments to support them in the interview process? So many people have had poor experiences, and that trust is broken. So how can we unpick that and create a new path forward? So I'll answer this from kind of a personal perspective and how I felt comfortable in doing that. I only felt comfortable with companies who were upfront about what they offer, and they weren't afraid of, you always hear the argument of like, oh, but if we say about our holiday policies and our sick leave, then people will come and they'll take advantage. 99.9% of people will not do that. People are just scared of the 0.1% that might. And the way to make people feel psychologically safe is to be transparent about what's on offer, and to show that you are actually a flexible company and that you're proud of that. Also putting your employees' voices at the very forefront of that. So people love a story. They love to be able to relate to that. So encourage employees to share about why flexibility matters to them. That could be on social media. Make sure that you use their stories on your careers pages. On Flexa, you can link to the fact that you are verified by Flexa in your job descriptions, on your careers pages, everywhere. And that gives people the source of truth that you are actually genuinely flexible because you've been verified by us, and people trust that as well. I think the most important thing is also to invite people to disclose it. I know lots of companies will do it because you kind of have to legally, but wording it in a certain way that explains, we at our company have got people with different disabilities, neurodivergent people, big mixture of diverse employee base, and using that as a way to make people feel like they will be welcome within your company as well. So just tell the story of the fact that your company is genuinely inclusive, and people will feel much more comfortable in disclosing it, rather than having to get some official form to fill in when they've seen absolutely nobody on your careers page who even seems like they might have needed to ask for adaptations. It's a good question though. Sam, would you add anything?
No, you've covered it well.
Interesting. A LinkedIn question. How relevant are job descriptions in a world where generalist roles continue to grow, or where there's a candidate hesitant to apply for certain roles based on a JD? That's a big picture question. Do you want to have a go at that one?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think the answer is still relevant, because when you've hit the shopping mall, and there's lots of options that you could feasibly apply for, you still need a way to try and give a job seeker a way of figuring out, is this role right for me or not. So although the roles might be becoming more generalist, I think you can still give a feeling for why this company or why this role might be different.
I was
And yes, and you know, the one thing I just quickly add, Molly, is that yes, like a product manager role might be really I'm actually, you know, software engineering is the better role. Software engineering role might be really similar across 200 companies, because it's a very hard skill based role, focused on the things that are different. How do you operate? How do you progress people? How do you treat people in terms of meritocratic environments, or is it actually hierarchical? Like, these are all the things that actually now are changing, and that's what you've got to talk about. It's no longer that you're a Python developer. So I think probably still really important. And you know, as we've said in this whole session, like, you need to stand out, and the ways you stand out are by finding little truths about your company that will make someone go, light bulb moment, I want to go work for this company, I'm going to make an application.
definitely, and I think employer branding and the kind of rise of the generalist role also go hand in hand together, because you'd be amazed as generalists how many companies will welcome someone going, I think your company's amazing, I'd love to do these different things for you, you know, would you ever consider me? And then you end up with these kind of long-term advocates who eventually there might be the role that kind of comes up for them, and making sure that people have somewhere to go if they are huge advocates of your company and desperately want to work for you, whether that's a speculative application or being able to save and engage with the company on Otter or Flexa or follow you on social media. But welcoming speculative applications as well is a great way to appeal to generalists who might be putting their, you know, their first step into the startup world and want to be operations or founders associate, or, you know, the more kind of generalist roles. Let me have a look at a few other questions. Question: can hiring take the omni-channel route? How can companies build coherent goals so that all channels merge to fetch collective results for hiring? Absolutely advocate omni-channel. Don't just put all of your eggs in one basket. Is one thing I would say. Treat it like that funnel. So be using social media. If Glassdoor is your friend, use Glassdoor. Not everybody's friend. Use Flexa, top of funnel, middle of funnel. If LinkedIn works for you, great. Otherwise, you know, look at places, look at Otter in particular. And then as you go down into the funnel, obviously you have to have your applicant tracking systems, your own different processes, but I wouldn't rely on just one source. I think you're cutting off the ability to replenish your lemon tree if you do that.
One thing I'd add on this is employer blogs can be very successful. Companies building in the open typically do attract people who may have just seen you and thought, wow, they really think about topic X in a really sharp way. Meeting people at events, hosting events, these are all ways of being even more omni-channel. So I completely agree with Molly's point here. Omni-channel is the best way. It's how you build brand. It's how you make sure people are thinking you're a distinctive, memorable organization. If you're just doing one way, it's probably going to be a way that eventually it falls through.
Mm-hmm. And so the answer of like coherent goals that all come together at the different stages and different channels that you're using, just pick 1, 2, 3 metrics that matter the most. So at top of funnel, that's going to be probably positive reviews, is going to be number of thousands of views. In the middle of funnel, it's going to be applications and quality applications. And at the bottom, it's going to be like successful hires and time to hire and cost to hire. So pick some metrics and just hammer away at them at all of those different places. And if one of those channels or one of those platforms that you've chosen isn't yielding you the results that you want, experiment. Go and find another one. It doesn't necessarily mean that omni-channel is bad. Let's have a look. Oh, that's an unusual one. Let's go with this one. Marty asking, do you, Sam, have data on the seniority of candidates that apply if the salary is mentioned? Like, does it have a positive effect on seniority?
I can't remember, so I don't want to give false data. All I know is, having spoken to a lot of senior candidates, is even more on their minds than it is at lower levels, because that's where the range just can really vary. You know, if you're a senior software engineer joining a company that's got 3 people that's a pre-seed level, your salary is not going to be as successfully high as it would be if you go join Spotify. And so actually at the senior levels, transparency really does matter. And also, frankly, senior people have typically more life stages that they have to really think about their income, mortgages, children, caring responsibilities. And therefore, at that level, salary counts probably more so than at the junior levels. But sorry, I don't really have the data to say that's definitely the case.
I definitely think your assumption makes sense. We have Kathy ask, how do you work on improving your employer brand on platforms like Glassdoor, and how much do bad ratings really affect application volume? I wouldn't have the exact figures on how much it affects application volume, but if Glassdoor is one of your only sources of employer brand, it's probably going to have quite a big impact. So it's near enough to impossible to get rid of Glassdoor reviews. But what you can do is distract from them and actually make sure that you are getting seen for the reasons that you want to be seen. And also pay attention to it. You know, if it is somebody that was sacked and they've come back with a vengeance, then fine, you can't really do anything about that. But if people are complaining about flexibility or progression or salary or all of those things, then that is valid feedback. But what I would say is if Glassdoor is a problem, get on other platforms that can help to draw attention to the positives. Make sure you're on social media, your employees are posting about it. You can come to Flexa. Our Flexa snippets rank above Glassdoor on pretty much every single company we have on Flexa. So great at distracting attention. And just try to build that positive employer brand in other places, because people will do their research. The average person, when they're serious about a company, spends 2 to 3 hours researching their company. So people will find that information. It's whether or not you've given them enough positive information to counteract it.
So we actually do have data on this. If I can just give a little bit of a snippet, it does matter. So your Glassdoor score is on your Otter job advert, which contains a lot of information from lots of places. So for every 100 people we show the job to, if you've got a 5-star Glassdoor review, it's roughly 9.5% of those people save, or 9.5 people. If you had a 1-star Glass review, it's only 2.5 people, and the line sort of goes up and to the right. So generally, higher scores matter, and people really do care about it. But the research that we've done at the kind of qualitative level, it really matters for when someone's making an application. So they'll save more jobs if it's a better Glassdoor score, but you will turn off a lot of people if you've not got a great Glassdoor score, and they start to read reviews and go, you know what, it's not worth my time. There's a really, really unhappy, employees or ex-employees here. I'm making my applications elsewhere. So I think Molly's advice was spot on for how you manage it, how you change it, and how you improve it.
Absolutely. Nala also said, are you able to share a few examples? So I'm conscious we've got 2 minutes there. I will let you go. The last question. Are you able to share a few examples of employer branding content for social media besides employee stories? So actually, really good example was Otter's own LinkedIn page sharing about their 9-day fortnight, doing little pictures of what employees were doing, and explaining the rationale and reasoning behind that. I loved that. It was really good. And just otherwise kind of sharing through your company LinkedIn. So we do a lot about Flexa, our own flexibility, what we're hiring for, why you might want to join us. But I would say that honestly, the most powerful employer brand content will come from your employees because it's believable. Or you can obviously look at third parties. Like we do an enormous amount of employer brand marketing for our companies that are on Flexa and focus all about their flexibility. And working with a third party will, like us, increases engagement by about 10x because of natural network effects. So it's really worth looking into that if you are focusing on employer brand. Sadly, we didn't get to answer all questions. I think I tried to pick a good selection. A few of them were quite similar. If you do have any specific questions for Sam or for me, then please do connect with us on LinkedIn. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining, and hope to see you at another webinar of either Flexas or Otters in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Nice to chat to you, Molly.
Cheers. Bye.